no juices, no fruits. But that's not how paleo people ate. Do you think paleo people woke up in the morning and said, oh, it's time for breakfast, then we'll go hunting, but we got to get back for lunch because I can't miss lunch. Then I'm going to take a nap, and then we'll go hunting again, and then I'm going to have steak for dinner, no carbs. They didn't do that in paleo times. Here's what happened in paleo times. This is real paleo eating. They didn't know when they were going to eat because some days you would have food, some days you wouldn't. Some days you would have vegetables and roots and, I don't know, legumes, whatever. And then rarely you would, I mean, it's not like they had a wild boar every day. Like rarely you would have a whole group that would go out and go hunting and get meat. I think most of the time it was like roots and vegetables and then occasionally meat. And it was sporadic. It wasn't like some days you'd eat one meal a day. Some days you'd eat like maybe two. I think breakfast is a myth. I think that was just created by whoever was the money-making propagandist behind the food pyramid said breakfast is the most important meal. Because like what's at the top of the food pyramid? Bread is at the top of like 14.
That was us growing up.
Yeah. You know what was at the top of the food pyramid when we were growing up, and maybe when many of you were growing up, or maybe even right now? Have they changed the food pyramid in the past 50 years? 14 servings of pasta a day is on the top of the food pyramid right now.
So funny.
Like, could you imagine eating 14 servings of carbs a day in this carbs? For paleo people, carbs are worse than coronavirus. Like, that would be like putting coronavirus at the top of the food pyramid. Let's just dunk this tuna fish sandwich in coronavirus and eat it. That's like the equivalent of like 14 servings of carbs, which is currently at the top of the food pyramid. Paleolithic times, yes, that's what paleo refers to. And again, it's not like they had like restaurants in paleo times. Like breakfast served from 8 to 10 a.m. and you have a coffee with that as well. And then come back at noon for tea time or whatever. Food pyramids look different in different parts of the world. You're right. You know why? Because it depends on who is selling what in different parts of the world. It's not like humans in different parts of the world need different foods. We're all the same species. It's just that different cereal companies paid money in the like milk. Where's milk on a food pyramid? Hold on a second.
Dairy, yeah.
Milk is like the worst poison in the world, and
I love milk.
Ugh, milk is disgusting.
I'm a milk drinker.
You ever have warm milk?
No.
What about when you were feeding your little babies, your little kids?
Nurse them. I breastfed
Ugh, you breastfed them. What? So let's just see the food pyramid. How about sugar and sweets are at the top of the food pyramid? Oh, no. Okay, I see. So 5% it should be sugar, sweets. 40% of your meals per day should be bread and pasta. Are you kidding me? Like, if you ate this much, that's why America
has diabetes.
Yeah, that's why everybody's getting coronavirus, because
who created the food pyramid, I wonder?
People with a lot of money, like Wonder Bread, like Hostess Twinkies paid for the food pyramid.
That was the top of our food pyramid when we were growing up. Yeah, I like those Twinkies.
Yeah, Twinkies were great. They changed the formula at some point too. It's not as good anymore.
Yeah.
But that's who made the food pyramid. Those you think Congress in their genius made the food pyramid? Like there was like a whole bunch of no, it's like lobbyists.
Yeah.
You know, the food basically congressmen in general, not all of them, but congressmen in general are paid for by lobbyists. They have to go. So a little story. I think you know this. In 2013, I started looking into running for Congress in upstate New York in 2014. And I thought there was a candidate there who was particularly weak. I won't describe who. And I thought I had a decent chance of winning. And a big-time senator / former presidential candidate wanted to endorse me. And so I had some meetings and some phone calls. But specifically, I had to hire this guy's campaign manager and pollster for like a lot of money. And then I had to convince some judge and also. So I figured, you know what, this is just BS. Like, I don't want to be why would I have to take a poll? And I asked them, why would I have to poll the people? I know what I believe in. I don't need to find out what they believe in. And they say, no, you have to campaign to what they believe in. And I'm like, no, I'm going to campaign to what I believe in.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't like that, so it didn't work out, and I decided not to run for Congress. But the point is, it's all about money. Every industry. You know which company pays the biggest amount for lobbyists in Washington, D.C.?
Sugar? I don't know.
Google.
Okay.
Google.
Sugar used to be before.
Yeah, sure. Sugar, oil, right? Pays a lot.
Yeah.
But
used to.
But Google is the biggest, pays for the most lobbyists, which is why look at what Donald Trump is threatening to do today. He's gonna roll back some legal protections for social media. Mm-hmm. He's specifically targeting Twitter and Facebook, but not Google, because Google spends the most on lobbyists. And I've seen Google do some pretty amazing things politically that you wonder, how did that happen?
Really?
I'll tell you how it happened, is they spend billions of dollars a year on, before I had Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, on my podcast, people were even calling me, asking about how much Google spends on lobbyists. Let's see what he says, but I didn't do that. Let's see, Jay, did you send me the IGLIVE link of questions? Oh, I need to shave. Jay, where is it? Okay, great question. And this is important for a lot of things. Jack Dillon, hi Jack. Jack Dillon asks, how do I prepare for my podcast? How do I try to improve it? How do I change it on a weekly basis? And this is important for a variety of things. And I think, it's similar answer to anything. Like, when you're trying to improve, for instance, as a parent, as an example, what do you do?
Well, you try things and you experiment, see what works, what doesn't work.
What's the latest experiment you've done as a parent? Have you dipped your kids in boiling water? Have you poured?
What have I done? I've experimented on allowing Sarah to self-regulate her bedtime.
And how's that experiment working out for you?
Well.
She goes to bed. Sometimes it's like she has, what do you call it when you race and you lap the other person? Like sometimes we see her the next day. She hasn't slept. She's playing on Twitch. Right, Jay? Jay knows. He's always on Twitch also.
Yeah. You're supporting that, Jay. Stop.
You're enabling our daughter to twitch. She's twitching. So improving anything, but here's how I improve the podcast. I'm always experimenting. So a lot of people say, oh, if you do something for 10,000 hours, you'll get better at it. That is total bullshit. Let's throw out the 10,000 hour rule right now. 10,000 hours, if you do 10,000 hours of something and you think you're going to be the best in the world, all you will have done is wasted 10,000 hours of your life, which is the equivalent of 5 work years. So forget about the 10,000 hour rule. The best way to get better at anything, whether it's a podcast or parenting or chess or poker or business or sales, is experiment. And the key to a good experiment is it has to be really easy and cheap to set up, like cheap in terms of money and cheap in terms of time. And it has to have very little downside, like you'll be able to do the experiment very quickly and not cost yourself reputation or too much money or too much time or whatever. And from every experiment, you'll always learn something. So there's no failure in experimenting. It's just like Thomas Edison said. He did, 10,000 experiments to create a light bulb. And someone says, how does it feel to fail 10,000 times? And he says, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I figured out 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb. So there's no failure in an experiment. You always learn something. And there's enormous upside. Like when he actually did make a light bulb, he created General Electric and became one of the richest men on the planet. So podcasts are the same thing. By the way, Stacy, the answer is yes, Robin is always going to be on these Q&As. Because I think Robin's fun for me to make fun of sometimes. And so I always like her here. So if I need to make fun of somebody and Jay's not around, I can always make fun of Robin.
That's right.
So with my podcast, I always do experiments. For instance, Robin and I are trying this Q&A, and we're rolling this up into the podcast as well. So every time we do these Q&As, I also put it onto the podcast now, just as of this week. Starting next Friday, I'm going to do Side Hustle Fridays on the podcast. It's going to be a 10-minute episode every Friday about a different side hustle. And lately I've been experimenting with doing some solo episodes, or also I've been experimenting, you probably can't tell, but I've been experimenting with the guests. So rather than just doing the latest celebrity memoir and having that person on the podcast, like some brainless person like Chelsea Handler. I don't mean to make fun of Chelsea Handler. I just thought she was really insincere in her book. But rather than doing, I'm just going to only have on guests that I'm super curious about, whether it's Mark Cuban or Congressman Tim Ryan or John McAfee or whoever. Somebody who I'm super, like, later today I'm interviewing a poker player / author, Maria Konnikova. So always something I'm really interested in, as opposed to just like some celebrity, because I think curiosity is more interesting to listen to. And my particular curiosity, right now, like this week, Kevin Hart was on Lewis Howes and Tim Ferriss's podcast. And those were great episodes. You should listen to Lewis Howes' podcast. You should listen to Tim Ferriss's podcast. They did a good interview with Kevin Hart. I don't need to interview Kevin Hart now. They did it. So I want to interview the people I'm particularly curious about, uniquely curious about, so I keep my podcast separate from the others. And so all of these things are experiments, and it's only by experimenting constantly that you get better at things in life. Every day, ask yourself, what are your experiments today? So, sometimes I experiment on writing, sometimes I experiment with a podcast, sometimes I experiment on my relationship with Robin, like how poorly I can treat her and see if she still likes me. Don't really seem to be, this doesn't seem to be moving so much. And every week I try to improve. So sometimes I'll improve, I'll interrupt less. Sometimes I'll have more questions. Sometimes I'll do podcasts in person. Sometimes I'll do it remote. So there's all these different ways to experiment. What are some of the, think right now, like, for the things you love and that you want to get better at, what are some things you can do to improve? If you play chess and you always play pawn to king 4, maybe you could experiment with pawn to queen 4. If you play poker, try experimenting by playing, varying up some of the hands you play. If you play, if you do sales, try a different strategy of how you say hello to someone. How you open up, how you ask them questions about their life, how you play around with silence when you're trying to do sales. Like you're in the middle of a sale and you're just, you say, is this something that would be interesting to you? And then you're just silent, dead silent, and see if that works. So with everything you do in life, experiment with silence. I'm not saying the screen moved too much. I don't know if we're on or not, but
and also I want to say something too, that this is not my world, being in front of a camera or so I am quiet a lot of times because I'm nervous.
You're nervous?
And I
you're hardly ever nervous.
I appreciate you guys being patient and with me. I may not talk as much, but as I get used to it, I'll be able to relax and
in most situations, you're not very nervous. Like, you're very outgoing.
I am, but like, I guess I get nervous in front of a camera. I'm just not, I've never done that. I'm always behind the scenes, and I'm okay with that.
You're not always behind the scenes. So when we had a party here a few months ago, it seems like 7 years ago, but it was just like literally 4 months ago. And it was a meet and greet. The Brooklyn Borough President, Eric Adams, came over, and it was just a week after Thanksgiving. He had come over for Thanksgiving. We decided to do a meet and greet with him. And just so you know, Brooklyn, if you take all the boroughs of Manhattan, if you take all the boroughs of New York City and turn them into cities, Brooklyn would be the third largest city in the United States. There would be LA, Chicago, Brooklyn. And Eric Adams won the presidency of Brooklyn with 91.8% of the vote. And next year, 2021, he's running for mayor of New York City, and he's kind of the front runner right now. So we invited all our friends over, and we wanted to have them meet Eric, and just, Eric would give a little speech. There's a lot of interesting people there. Eric gave a little speech. There were Democrats there, there were Republicans there. Eric's a Democrat because everyone in New York City is a Democrat, but he's very solutions oriented. He's not like, he's actually very critical of both Democrats and Republicans. He focuses on solutions first. He's a very interesting guy. He at one point was diagnosed as diabetic, and he went on a pure vegan diet, lost like 1 billion pounds, and stopped being diabetic. Yeah, Instagram Live was down a little bit, so I don't know if you missed anyone. Jay, did you still hear me speaking, or should I say new things? Or should I say things again? Jay, I can see your message. Did you hear me talking about experimenting on podcasts? We went in a black hole. I don't know. Now it's working.
I know, that was sort of weird.
Just someone, or Jay, did you hear? Okay, yes. Jay, did you hear me talking about podcast experimenting? All right. No, I'm not. Whatever. So anyway, we're having this party for Eric Adams, a meet and greet. And again, Eric's a very solution-oriented guy. He, even though this is New York City, he carries a concealed weapon on him at all times, even to church, as he puts it. He was a police officer for like 20 years. Then he was a state senator in Albany. Then he was Brooklyn Borough president. Now he's running for mayor. We had this party. We invited our friends. Gary Kasparov came, a bunch of Democrats, a bunch of Republicans. And you were the life of the party. I am so shy and introverted that even though all my friends were there, I hid in the bedroom for almost the entire time. And then I can't handle being around other human beings one-on-one.
I'd rather that than like this. Because I love people. I love interacting with people. This is people. I know. But it's still, I don't know. It's like, it's different for me. So I'm doing the best I can. So
this is an experiment for you.
Yes.
So you should
experimenting.
So let me ask you a story then. I'm going to ask you specific. You have all these stories. Uh-huh. When you first moved, you moved from Texas to Ghana, and how old were your kids then? You had 3 kids. How old were they?
They were 6, 4, and 3.
6, 4, and 3.
Yeah.
So a bunch of little rats. Mm-hmm. And you moved to Ghana. What was the first kind of cultural surprise for you that like made you think? Did you ever think, oh my gosh, this is going to be too much for me to handle?
Well, a lot of things happened, but we didn't have running water for the 3 years we lived there, and we didn't have really electricity either. But we had large, containers for water, like thousands of gallons. And
would you have to heat it up to disinfect it?
No, we had huge filters that were just as big as this room. Because of all the things that are in the water. And then we had a, what do you call it? Like for our power.
Matt says where in Ghana?
In Accra.
Accra. I feel like that's from a movie. I feel like that's from Lawrence of Arabia. That's Aqaba is in Lawrence of Arabia. My all-time favorite movie.
So we had a generator. We had all this stuff. But the first month we were there, Sarah, we thought she had malaria. She got malaria, so I took her because she only had like a 99.9 temperature. Did she take
hydroxychloroquine for malaria?
Yeah, I did. I did that for 3 years.
Really?
Uh-huh.
It's like a prophylactic?
Yes.
Wow.
So,
did you die?
No, I didn't. But anyway, so it turned out that she had appendicitis, and we caught it so early that we were able to give her antibiotics because we were going to fly to London, and evacuate, and we decided to wait and to do these the inoculation for antibiotics, and it worked. So
she was living there for 3 years. Well, then where did you live?
And then we moved to China for 6 years.
Where in China?
Chengdu, China, in the middle, on the base of the Himalayas.
So when I met Robin, when she said she lived in Chengdu, China for 6 years, I didn't even know I had never even heard of Chengdu before. How many people live in Chengdu?
It's like so many. It's like the 11th largest city.
So the 11th largest city
in China.
And,
it's like.
And so how many people though, roughly?
Millions. Oh my God.
Bigger than Manhattan?
Oh yeah.
So bigger than Manhattan. I never even heard of it. Yeah. How many people spoke English in Chengdu?
Oh, very few when we lived there. And that's where they build all the this things for the iPhone. You know, that's where they all commit suicide. You know, what's that place called?
Foxconn?
Foxconn. Yeah. We would drive by there, and it's like this, it's like gray with all these lights and these big fences, and it was like, went for miles.
By the way, I think it would be interesting if we send our kids to have internships at Foxconn. Not so that they kill themselves or anything. Obviously, we don't want that. But that would be just a fun story for them to tell. I interned at Foxconn. Here's what happened. Like you always want to figure out how kids can stand out. And it's really important to have stories to tell. And I guarantee if an 18-year-old goes and works at Foxconn for a year, making iPhone parts, they're going to have stories to tell for the rest of their lives. Yeah. Or instead of sending them to like some shitty college in the United States, send them to Wuhan University.
Yeah, I was going to send John to Tibet to work, to just live with the Tibetans one summer.
That would be good.
Yeah, he was going to do that. We love Tibet.
Why don't we send Lily and Molly to Wuhan University next year? It's the safest place in the world right now. There's no virus there. Mm-hmm. Virus is gone. I'd rather them go to Wuhan University than NYU.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I don't
It's
care.
done. You've heard it here. Two of our kids are going to go to Wuhan University. They've got a great epidemiology department. I hear they do a lot of work on bats, and it's something we gotta learn.
We were watched though, so I mean, we had people, our drivers, because we weren't allowed to drive, were all ex-military, so they kept track of us, and we were not allowed to talk about anything in the car because they would, they were listening.
But that makes sense.
Yeah.
I always I used to go on business meetings, and sometimes the company I was meeting with would send a car to pick me up at the airport, and I always made sure who knows? I never talk in the elevator. Remember one time, Jay was with us, one time we had a meeting, a very important meeting, and we're out there waiting for the elevator, and our friend who was with us starts trashing the company that we just met, and people are walking by. You always got to be careful. People are listening in on your conversations. Not to be paranoid, it's just realistic. My first company, never did this, but we were debating putting a recorder in the elevator so after meetings we could hear what people said about us.
Yeah.
But we decided not to. We decided to be ethical instead. Let's see. More questions. Liver USA. So Live Rich USA. I was calling it Liver Chusa, but it's Live Rich USA asks the very important question: what thing was the best $10 I ever spent? What's the best $10 you ever spent? I don't even know off the top of my head what that.
To go on the subway.
Yeah.
Get really far.
Oh yeah. In New York City, the subway is faster than any other transportation. But I'm trying to think, is that really the best $10 I ever spent? No. Oh, I'll tell you the best $10 I ever spent. I talk about it all the time. I went in in June or July or August. I think it was July of 2002. I was taking a walk. I was so depressed. I was losing my house. I was dead broke. I thought I was gonna honestly either die of depression or suicide or something. And I wandered into this restaurant supply store. I don't know why. I'm always just fascinated by the design of restaurant supplies. And there was this big box in the front of 100 waiters pads for sale for $10, 10 cents a pad. And with $10, that was by far the best investment I ever made. I bought my first waiters pads, and ever since then, I've been writing 10 ideas a day down. And I've mentioned this before, and I've written about this before. My very first list was I wanted to write a book of and the title was going to be How to Beat Your Friends at Every Game in the Universe. So the idea is for Thanksgiving or Christmas, you go home to your family and everyone has dinner, and then they break out like Monopoly or Scrabble or checkers or chess or cards like hearts or spades. And I wrote down every game and then the top 4 tips to beat your friends at every game possible. So, for instance, with poker, this isn't true for like tournaments or something, but just against your friends, if you don't ever bluff. So if you have a strong hand, bet big. If you have a weak hand, fold. And if you just follow that advice, you can beat the average player just coming off the street. In Scrabble, if you know all the 2-letter words like QI, XI, XU, KA, AA, if you know those words, you're going to win in Scrabble. Also, if you know the Q without U words like QAT, QOPF, QANAT, words like that, you'll win. Checkers, if you start at the bottom left corner and just move, that's the corner where you have one checker right on the corner, and you just move diagonally in this direction, you'll do better than others. Monopoly, if you own the orange properties, New York Ave, St. James Place, Tennessee Ave, you'll win in Monopoly. And so on. Q words without U. Yes. And hint in Scrabble, if you know SATINE, Satine, that's what's called a stem. It's 6 letters. It's the most popular 6 letters that you'll get on Scrabble. Well, given almost any letter, you can form a 7-letter word. So if you have Satine, and then you pick up from the bag an E, that's Etesian, ETESIAN. So if you know just Satine, you could probably you can probably beat everybody in Scrabble. Anyway, that was my first list. But somehow, after I started writing ideas down, 10 ideas a day, every single day. So the next day would be another book. Next day might be trading strategies. I write down 10 trading strategies. The next day might be 10 articles I can write. The next day might be 10 business ideas. And after about a month, I don't know, for the first time in years, I was no longer depressed. Like, I suddenly felt like my brain was rewired. I was excited all the time about writing down ideas, trying out ideas, experimenting. And then I started sending out ideas to people. So,
that's great.
2 days ago, I wrote down a list of ideas for a company that I got very excited about. I've been using this company for something, and I came up with 10 ideas for them, sent it to them. They called me yesterday, asked me to be on their board of directors. So once we figure it out, the negotiation, I'll announce that. But that came out of a 10 idea list. You literally, writing down 10 ideas a day, once it starts to rewire your brain, you'll literally make money from it all the time. And all the money I've ever made came from that.
And I think that's one thing that attracted me to you is that
you're attracted to me?
That you do think out of the box, because living abroad, I too think out of the box. I have a different perspective, and I think by what you do is it allows you to have a different perspective because you're not confined. So, like, for me, I didn't do the 10 lists a day, right, living overseas, but I actually lived it. I was able to experiment every day because there were a lot of things that we couldn't get in Ghana that, we had here or in China. And so every day was a new, it was just if you ever have an opportunity to be an expat, I think
live abroad.
And to live abroad is such a great thing because you are able to really reconnect your brain in terms of different ideas and different perspectives. So every day was a new day. No day was ever the same because you never knew what you were going to wake up to, and you always had to solve problems because other countries, the countries I lived in, they're not good at solving problems. They're just not. It's weird.
I can't even imagine really, and I've never lived abroad. I feel like inferior to you in this way. Like, I've never had that experience. I've just spent a few weeks here, a few weeks there. I think it would be really hard for me. Like, just spending a few weeks in India, for instance, while it's a beautiful country, I can't even imagine being there for more than 3 weeks. Like, to be someplace for 3 years where it's so brutal, the living conditions.
6 years in China. That's a long time.
What is the biggest insect you ever saw in all your years living abroad? That was in your house.
Oh, probably the spider in China. They're like the size of my hand.
And it would
their
crawl?
body is about the size of my
Did you wake up and it was like crawling on your arm or on your face?
No, but they were on the walls and all of Asia has really big, scary things.
So, Urban, yes, we can do a book swap. Tell me what book you would like, and I'll switch books with you. Any more? Let's see if there's more questions. Robin, why were you living overseas?
Well, my late husband was an ecologist, and he worked for an oil company.
Which oil company?
I don't think I should say that.
Why?
I don't know. I just don't think so.
All right. She's not going to say. She's not going to say that her entire family works for the CIA, and she never will admit it, ever. I said it, but whatever. Another question. So this is from Mila Deschant. I don't know if I said it right. Mila Deschant. And Mila, I think you recently asked me to be on your podcast. You say, I am always looking to bring on guests on my podcast whom I jive with. I've been waiting to bring on state reps, but it's hard to reach them. Do you have any tips on how to invite? Yes. There's two keys. There's breadth and depth. So, first off, you have to ask a lot of people. So when I was in 6th grade, I wanted to invite a politician to speak to my class. And I asked congressmen, senators, mayors, state representatives, state senators. Finally, one state senator responded. I remember his name, Bernard Dwyer. He later became the congressman in my district. And he came to speak to my class. But you have to ask a lot of people. So Steve Cohen, who used to be the producer of my podcast, he would probably, for every 20 people he asked, only about one would respond. Then that's the breadth. Then you have to do depth. So 16 touches is the rule. So you send them email. You don't always ask them to come on. You know, for instance, Mark Cuban came on my podcast recently, and I've known Mark since 1997. But in the months leading up to him coming on my podcast, I was following all of his actions with how he was treating his employees during the beginning of the pandemic and the lockdown. And I was always sending him emails, like very sincere emails, like congratulating him on different things and noticing different things. You just don't always ask for things. Sometimes you just give and no ask. Sometimes you write a letter and you say, hey, that was a great job, what you did over there. Congrats, or congrats on this, or congrats on that. And then eventually, when they do have some reason to come and talk to you, like Mark Cuban was considering running for president. I don't know if he still is. He came on the podcast, and I made it very simple and easy for him to say yes. I was very agreeable to whatever time he wanted. So, again, breadth, ask a lot of people, and depth. The key is 16 touches, not 16 asks, but 16 touches. And the same thing. So one time I had to sell a company, and I sent out, and when you sell a company, assuming your company is an okay company and good enough to be sold, here's the ratio, 20 to 6 to 3 to 1. So I reached out to 20 companies that I wanted to meet, 6 responded, 3 met with me, and 1 made an offer to buy the company. It was a mental health, it was like a drug rehab facility for teenagers. We sold it for $41 million cash. And you know, it was, again, that 20 to 6 to 3 to 1 ratio. I'll tell you, Positive Magic Scientist, if you're Steve, then thank you for that advice. The 16 touches rule. But anyway, I will tell you one story about selling this drug rehab facility. So there was one point where we got this offer for $41 million. And the hardest part of selling a company is not getting the offer, this is counterintuitive a little bit. It's waiting between the moment you get the offer and the moment the deal actually closes, because that's when all the lawyers come in. You're no longer talking to the company. You're no longer best friends with the company anymore. Now it's like getting a deal to sell a company is the equivalent of a prenup. Like when you get married, you're selling your freedom and singleness. So sometimes people are so worried about that, they have a legal agreement. They get a prenup. We did not do a prenup, by the way. We didn't even think about doing a prenup. But when you're selling a company, that contract between the time of the offer and the time the deal actually closes, the contract to actually sell the company is almost like a prenuptial agreement. And it's so stressful. It's unbelievably stressful because everybody gets buyer's remorse, seller's remorse, and so on. So one time, I was just a minority shareholder of this drug rehab facility, even though I brokered the whole deal. The CEO calls me up at one point and says, James, I don't want to sell anymore. And I'm like, oh my God, Michael, what are you talking about? And he says, no, if we got $41 million offer, think of what we'll get next year. We'll get a $61 million offer. And I'm like, Michael, when I met you, you only got a $10 million offer. I moved it from $10 million to $41 million in less than a year. Take the $41 million. And he's like, no. Let's just build the company and let's sell it for $61 million. So I called Susan. I called Michael's wife, Susan. She was younger. He was an old man. She was younger, pretty, blonde, blue-eyed, whatever. That was his thing. And he was addicted to pornography, but he still married this younger, prettier bride who put up with him. And I said to her, Susan, Michael's considering not selling. Let me ask you a question, Susan. What did you do on the job today? And she said, well, there was a girl in the drug rehab facility who flipped out, a teenage girl, and she shat on the floor, picked up the shit, and rubbed it all over the walls. And I said, Susan, what would have happened if she had gone to the roof and jumped off the roof and killed herself? Susan said, well, we probably would have been shut down by the state for at least a year or two while we renewed our license. And I said, well, Susan, if you don't close this deal and someone jumps off the roof, then you might be cleaning shit off the walls for the next 10 years of your life. Is that what you signed up for when you married this idiot? And I'll tell you, we got off the phone, and an hour later, the CEO called me and said, I'll take the deal. And I remember the day the deal was closing, we're driving to the lawyers, and the CEO was saying to me, I'll tell you one thing though, I want the full $41 million. The company owes $1 million in debt. They're not subtracting that from the deal price. And I'm like, all right, Michael, whatever. I didn't even argue at this point. We're on our way to the lawyers. At some point, things are going to happen. And we get there, and of course, the other company says, oh no, we got to subtract $1 million in debt from the $41 million. And he said, okay, because I knew that would happen. Then the next thing was we needed the government of Connecticut to approve the deal because they're a licensed company. And fortunately, one of our top executives was the state Senate minority leader of Connecticut. So he got that done, and it helps to have connections. That's why people always say, oh, if I build a good company, then I could sell it. Selling it is not easy. You got to work really hard to get the offer. You got to survive all the legal stuff. You got to survive buyer's remorse and seller's remorse. You got to solve all these last minute things that come up. My very first company that I sold, the one last thing we had to do before the deal closed is I had to get permission from the landlord. The landlord was this really old guy, and he hated us for some reason. But you got to get permission from the landlord because he's going to suddenly, once I sell the company, he's going to have a new tenant. The buyer of my company is the new tenant, so he has to approve. Most people don't know this. When you sell your company, it's odd that you would need the approval of a random person. I had never even met the landlord. This random person had to, his yes or no, my whole life depended on it. I had $0 in the bank, and I was going to make millions from selling my company, and I needed this Russian Jewish immigrant who worked in the garment district in New York City to approve me selling the company, and he hated us because we were always late on the rent. So he said no. And so every day, I would stand outside of his factory on 37th Street and 9th Avenue with a coffee and a donut for him. And every day I would ask him, please sign this approval.
Oh my God.
And finally he said, give me some stock advice. And I'm like, great, I'll give you some stock advice. I didn't know anything about stocks. This was like 25 years ago. But people always thought because of the way I look that I know something about things. So finally he approved, but it was so stressful. I don't think I slept for like 10 weeks while that deal was going through.
Scary.
Do you think, Camellia Yang, Do you think making a bilingual podcast is a good idea? At the moment, I'm doing all in Chinese, but love to try it in English. Shall I start another podcast? Camellia, it's a great question. I'm actually thinking myself of translating both into Chinese, my podcast, and Hindi, because I have large audiences both in China and in India. And I think it's a great idea to translate your podcast if you have someone willing to do the translation for you. So
I think so too. Okay, I mean, a lot of Chinese really want to learn English, so I mean, that's.
Is it true more people in China speak English than in the United States?
Well, there's more people in China, so
I heard there's 300 million people that speak English in China.
I don't know.
Like, how many people live in Hong Kong?
Oh gosh, I don't know how many people live in Hong Kong.
Like 20 million? So they all speak English.
Yeah.
Maybe more people. A lot of people speak English in China.
But it depends on the area of China, of PRC. So, like, if you're living, like in Shenzhen or Shanghai, Beijing, they do. But when you go into China, they typically it's more difficult.
And you speak a little Mandarin, right?
I do speak Mandarin, yeah.
So we were at the comedy club. So I own a comedy club across the street. We were at the comedy club. Ronnie Chang was there. So I don't know if you've seen Ronnie Chang's excellent recent special on Netflix. Ronnie Chang he was kind of the really uptight brother-in-law in Crazy Rich Asians. Anyway, Ronnie Chang's a great comedian, so brilliant. We're hanging out with Ronnie Chang. She mentions she speaks Chinese. And Ronnie, being a little bit of a dick, I think, he starts speaking Chinese to you. But you responded. You kept up with him. And he was impressed, I think.
Yeah.
So, as Jay knows, it's hard to get Malaysians to be impressed. They have a very gruff way about them. Is that right, Jay? You're like the least gruff Malaysian person I've ever met. Not to stereotype your entire country.
Someone just asked if it's safe to live in Shanghai by themselves. And to be honest, I probably would not live in China unless I had a big organization behind me, managing everything. Because
fortunately, she had the CIA behind her, but yes.
So I would not recommend that, personally.
Especially
now.
Even if you were with me, protecting you?
Yes, we would not want to do that.
I guess I'm useless.
Has nothing to do with you, honey. Just lots of stuff.
So, let's see. Other questions. Well, let's talk for a second about, yesterday I talked about building an online newsletter. And I think actually it's just first off, I want to talk about the online newsletter thing a little bit more, because there's other ways to make money than creating a subscription newsletter. So yes, she speaks Mandarin. She already answered that. If you create an online newsletter, don't think right away that it has to be a subscription newsletter. Now, I mentioned several. So at Substack.com, you can see what the top paid newsletters are. But let me just tell you, it is actually much more valuable if you can spend the time. It takes a little bit more time. It is much more valuable to create a free newsletter that has 10 times as many subscribers or 100 times as many subscribers as a for-pay subscription newsletter. Because two reasons. So let's say you're going to make a newsletter about fantasy sports or investing or parenting or cooking or good news or coronavirus or whatever. Much better to create a free newsletter, and I'll tell you why. There's two revenue opportunities. One is you put in what are called space ads. So when you send out your newsletter every day, and a great example of this is Morning Brew. Morning Brew has about 2 million subscribers for free. It's a free newsletter. So it has the morning news, and it's kind of oriented towards the financial markets. So Morning Brew puts out a free newsletter, 2 million subscribers, but then there are ads in the newsletter. Now, the ads may or may not make money, but if it's an affiliate deal, they make an enormous amount of money. So, for instance, let's say, Ramit Sethi is a friend of mine, or Jay Shetty is a friend of mine. Let's say I'm advertising one of their courses in the newsletter. People are cool seeing advertisements in a newsletter, so that's not a big deal. But instead of charging for the ad, what I typically do, and I haven't done it with these two people, I'm just using them as an example, but what I typically do is instead of charging for the ad, I'm only going to put in a course where I personally believe in it, and I'll do a deal called an affiliate deal. I'll say, hey, split 50-50. If anybody comes from my newsletter and buys your course, we'll split the deal 50-50. So if Ramit, say, is doing a course for $2,000, then everybody who goes out of my 2 million subscribers, if I was Morning Brew, for instance, everybody who goes buys Ramit's newsletter or course, I get $1,000. So that could create millions of dollars a year without you having to do any more work. You don't have to do all the work of a subscription newsletter. That means you save all the headaches of accepting credit cards, customer service, delivering a 4-pay newsletter as well as your free newsletter. So those affiliate deals with high-end courses or newsletters, that's so much more valuable. And having a large subscriber base instead of just having your paying subscribers, which is a much smaller universe. Typically, your paying subscribers will only be 1 or 2% of your non-paying subscribers. So much better to have influence and reach millions of people than to only sell and deliver your best content to paying subscribers. So that's one way to make money. And then the other way is you have this is an example from another great newsletter, which I talked about the other day, called The Hustle. And they talk about side hustles and so on. They recently started a research service called Trends at trends.co. And that's a subscription service. And they were able to use their free newsletter to sell this new service after they'd already been in business for a few years. So, and they have over 1 million subscribers on their free service. So again, focus, no matter what you do, whether it's a course or a newsletter, there's always money there. But the most valuable thing is to get a huge number of free subscribers. Now, one time somebody told me, this guy Porter Stansberry, who's runs a big subscription company, and he knows what he's doing. He once told me, your non-paying customers are worth crap. But I think he's wrong, and I've seen it myself now. He's completely wrong. His issue is he has a huge infrastructure, lots of employees to take care of. If you have a much cheaper infrastructure, you have much bigger reach starting a huge free newsletter. But I do think an online course is a really great idea because you only have to make the content once, and then it kind of lives forever. So you can keep selling it forever. So, for instance, I can create, let's say, an online course about investing, and I can put it on a site like Teachable. So I like teachable.com, but there's also highbrow.com, there's coursera.com, there's thinkific.com. There's all these platforms, but I like teachable.com. I liked it so much I was an investor in teachable.com until they recently got sold. I would use Teachable, but you could use any of them. And if I was going to make an online course, I would take out my idea list. I would say, here are the 10 sections. I'll talk about, value investing, growth investing, arbitrage, history of investing. What is investing? How do you value something? Other types of investing other than stocks, so like real estate investing or whatever. And then I would come up with 10 bullet points per lesson. So each one of those things I just said was a lesson. I would come up with at least 10 to 20 individual lessons. Then I would come up with 10 bullet points I would cover on each lesson. I would have video. I would have audio. I would have text. I would have homework. I would have me, writing different charts or linking to different articles or blogs that I thought was important for each thing. I would deliver a huge amount of value. And then, once again, you got to do the spoken wheel approach. But in order to market your online course, you go on podcasts, create a podcast, write articles on seekingalpha.com or Medium or LinkedIn or Forbes.com or whatever. Do a free newsletter where you start talking about investing. So, again, you got to use the spoken wheel approach to drive people to the online course. I think the online course idea is probably a little better than the subscription newsletter idea, but it's 6 of one, half a dozen or the other, and I'm happy to answer questions about any of these. If I had all money taken away from me and I was dropped in the middle of Kansas City. I'm just making it up. And I was told, you have to start from nothing, and you can't tell anybody you're here, and you just have to, and here's your fake identity. I would start an online newsletter, and that's how I would make money. That would be the best way to make money. And I would have to decide, I would do free, then subscription, and then, an online course. And I would do all these things. I would answer questions on Quora. I would do a podcast. I would try to go on other podcasts. I'd try to speak at conferences. I would do some advertising, but not that much. You don't really have to do that much. You really want people to build up trust, and they don't really build up trust through ads. They build up trust through getting to know you from articles. And so happy to answer any questions about. I think these ideas are the best ideas. If you want to make $1 million within a year, this is the best idea to do it, is an online newsletter. Now, yesterday I wanted to talk about why is only 50 minutes goes by like it's nothing. It's 2:53 already.
Wow.
Okay, what day is it today?
Thursday.
Okay, tomorrow I'm going to talk about my favorite. Like if I was 25 years old, there's one business in particular I would do now. Last week I talked about coronavirus compliance and why I think that could be a $10 to $20 million business if you start it today. But tomorrow I'm going to describe a business which I am absolutely convinced you could make. I would say it would take about 2 to 4 years, but I'm absolutely convinced you can make a $10 million profit. I will describe the business from beginning to end tomorrow. It might be a little technical, but I'm excited to talk about it. And but I'm not ending this IG Live yet. Let's answer some more questions. Jay, I don't think you're getting all the questions. I see people asking questions nonstop, and they're not showing up here. Oh, this is a good question, but it's in the weeds a little on the newsletters. How do you keep your affiliates honest? Like, so let's say I send 10,000 people to Ramit Sethi's course on how to get rich. How do I know when he pays me money that was the accurate amount of people who signed up? There's a lot of software. There's affiliate software. I forget the names, unfortunately. It changes all the time. But there's affiliate software you can use where both sides have transparency into how many customers result. So just Google tracking affiliate deals or tracking affiliate software, and you'll find plenty of software. That's a good question because you will get ripped off. Whenever I haven't used affiliate software, I've probably gotten ripped off. But you can track it pretty easily, and you won't get ripped off then. And by the way, if someone does rip you off, they get a bad reputation. It's a small industry. They get a bad reputation instantly, like overnight. And so no one's going to rip you off, particularly if there's tracking software. So ask questions. Tap affiliate. I don't know. I'll check it out, but that's probably one. All right. I'm gonna look at another IG Live.
For 50-year-olds too, which we are.
For 50-year-olds, what?
They want ideas.
Well, an online newsletter or an online course is a great idea for a 50-year-old. It's actually a better idea for a 50-year-old than a 20-year-old because when you're 20, you're probably not an expert in anything. But when you're 50, you start to build expertise in things. Like if you just think right now, maybe you're not an expert on cooking, or maybe you're not an expert on, genomics or biotech, but with some study, you don't have to be the best in the world. You just have to be in the top 1%. And when I say just, it sounds like I'm saying, he just said just be in the top 1%. That's not that hard to do. The way you get into the top 1%, I'll give you 3 learning models that I use personally to try to be in the top 1% of whatever field I'm in. One is divide up a skill into micro skills. So for instance, let's say you want to be an expert on chess. Okay, there's no such skill as chess. You have to be an expert you have to divide it up into micro skills. There's the openings, there's the end game, there's the middle game, there's tactics, there's strategy, there's all sorts of there's all sorts of micro skills. Let's say you want to be an expert on comedy. There's writing one-liners, there's writing funny stories, there's stage presence, there's crowd work, there's likability, there's all these micro skill. There's no one skill called comedy. There's all these micro skills. Let's say you want to be an expert on entrepreneurship. Again, there's no such skill as entrepreneurship. There's selling, there's negotiating, there's executing on products, there's coming up with products, there's creativity, there's selling your company, there's keeping a client. So I was really notorious. With my first business, I was super good at sales. Like my first company, I made websites for a living. So I'd make websites for all these gangster rap record labels like Bad Boy Records, Death Row Records, Loud Records. I was super good at selling and getting people excited about why they needed a website. And then I was the worst at follow-up. So for instance, jpmorgan.com, the bank JP Morgan, I worked really hard. I sold the heck out of selling JP Morgan. They needed jpmorgan.com. No one had made it yet. I went in there. I was working as a full-time employee at HBO. I snuck on my suit. I ran down the block to make the meeting in like 90-degree weather. I was sweating. I got into their conference room, and I just sell the shit out of it. And they wanted to hire me to do their website for like $1 million. This was would have been by far the biggest website I had ever done, by far. And people depended on me. Even though I was a full-time employee at HBO, I quietly had a company with 20 employees a few blocks away. They all depended on me. JP Morgan called me every single day, and I just never followed up. I was really bad at follow-up. And we didn't do the deal. I never called them back. I refused to call back JP Morgan. And I was so stupid. So don't feel bad. I messed up so many times when I was starting my first business. Who would not call back JP Morgan on $1 million deal? Me. I was an idiot. So eventually I had to hire people whose sole job was to follow up for me. Thank you, Jay, right now. Jay follows up for me on most of it. Robin follows up for me. I have another partner, Dan. This has been my business partner since 1999. He does all the follow-up. I am so bad at it. I have 50 people I have to return their phone calls now. But that's a skill. I never learned that skill. If you don't have that skill, you need to figure out how to replace it, or else you don't have a business. So, another thing. One time, 1 minute, 44 seconds left. I'll tell this story super quickly. One time, I was pitching Tupac Shakur's mom. Tupac had just died. I was pitching his mom that I would do this post-memorial website for him. I go in to see the mom and the manager, and they said, okay, show us all your sites. They had a PC, an IBM PC. I had only ever used a Macintosh. I didn't know how to use a PC. I didn't know how to even turn it on. And they said, you're trying to sell us your abilities as a computer expert to build a website, and you can't even turn on the computer? And I'm like, if you had a Mac, I can do it. I said, I'm an expert. I'll show you everything on a Mac. And they literally, this is the one and only time this has ever happened to me. They started pointing and laughing at me. They said, you can't turn on a computer and you're trying to sell us a $100,000 website? And I said, I don't know how to use a PC. And they were laughing so hard. And I picked up my bag and I just walked out of the room. And all these employees were depending on me. And I went back to my office and everyone said, how'd the meeting go? Because we all needed it for payroll. And I said, the meeting went great. And then I had to find another deal before the month was over.